Good evening and welcome to the Cambridge Union and tonight's debate. This House has lost confidence in Her Majesty's police force. As many of you will know from the propaganda we sent out, this is the first time in the Union's history we are hosting a debate on the UK police force. I don't know why, but it is, and we like to celebrate anniversaries, so this is one of them. So we're very excited tonight about this debate. With riots on the streets of London, the bribing of police officers by the media, the erosion of civil liberties, and the shooting of unarmed black teenagers, the Union tonight is questioning its confidence in Her Majesty's police force and asking whether they still live up to their mantra of fidelity, bravery, and integrity. If you're joining us online tonight, as I understand that many of you are, whilst I presume doing essays, tonight's hashtag is #CUSPolice. Please do tweet us with your comments or questions, and I will do my best to read them out from the floor here. Obviously, the purpose of the Union is for you to challenge what you hear and contribute yourself. If you look at the back of your order papers, you will see many ways in which you can do so. Please do interrupt our speakers. That is what they are here for. They are more than happy to take your points, I'm sure. Katie's shaking her head, but most of them are happy to take their speeches, I'm sure. Just stand up and say point of information or on that point if you'd like to interrupt them. There will also be time for floor speeches between each pair of speakers where you can get a 1-minute speech in proposition, opposition, or abstention. So, that brings us to tonight's debate. This House has lost confidence in Her Majesty's police force. And to open the case for the proposition, I call Baroness Doreen Lawrence. Baroness Lawrence lost her son Stephen in 1993 in a racially motivated attack that was mishandled by a, quote, institutionally racist, unquote, police force. She has since campaigned tirelessly for police reform. Baroness Lawrence.
I have no confidence in Her Majesty's police force, and this is the reason why. In 1993, my son Stephen was murdered. I was informed of his attack by a neighbour. We went to the hospital, and at the time, there was 2 police officers there. They may not know that I was Stephen's mother, but when they did know, nobody approached me. Nobody came to me and asked any questions. I used to say, this is your son, Stephen. May 1993, I met with Nelson Mandela. And through meeting with Mr. Mandela, it was the reason why the first arrest was ever made of those individuals. Even though, before that, leading up to that, people were coming to our house and saying, we know who the killers are, these are their names, and this is where they live. All this information was passed on to the police. They did nothing with it. In August of '93, the CPS dropped the case. So in May '93, they were arrested, and by August, the case was dropped, and they were released. Then in August of '93, we met with, I think, Detective Sergeant, I'm not certain of his title, but Mr. Baker. And at the time, we explained to him what our problems were and how we saw how the police and how we felt the police was treating us. He promised at the time that he was going to do a review and he would inform us as to the result of his review. And around at the same time, we met with the Commissioner of Police, which was Paul Condon at the time. And they too said that we would hear some information. So we decided that we were going to take it a private prosecution. So in 1994, we were assigned a police officer, Perry Nove, I don't remember his title, but he decided that he was going to do a surveillance of the individuals of their house. But these individuals did not realize that the recording that was happening was not just audio, but visual as well. So while they were talking, they were making signs, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but not exactly saying exactly what they were thinking. In April of '95, the first time of us meeting those individuals who we say were part of Stephen's murder. And this is when we decided about the private prosecution, so we went to Greenwich Court, and they walked in with their family. And before that, we were they knew what we looked like, but we had no idea what they looked like. So '95 was the first time that we saw the suspect. Then August of '95 was when we had a committal hearing at Belmarsh down in southeast London. And there for the first time, we were able to see the surveillance tape that the police had had done. And in that tape, they were giving you arm movements of how they would stab people, what they would do to Asian and black people. So that was our very first time of seeing that tape. Then in 1996, we were able from 95 to, so we got past the committal hearing to go to the crowd, to, can't forget the court in London, the High Court in London. And there, for the private prosecution. So the first week, there was legal arguments. So we knew we didn't have a single one evidence that could convict these individuals. But we thought a combination of what we had was enough if the jury had an opportunity to see what we had. The legal arguments lasted for nearly 2 weeks, and the judge decided to instruct the jury to bring a not guilty verdict. So where do we go from here? Then we had the inquest. So it comes down to the police again. During the time we were collecting all the evidence around the private prosecution, we were led to believe by the police officers who were supporting us that the first investigation was so bad they can't believe that the police did not able to gather the evidence, much less to charge these individuals. There's one particular officer, which I will never forget his name, John Cant. He stood up under oath and said that he felt that the only problem within the first investigation was between the family and the liaison officers. But before he was leading us to believe that the investigation was not carried out properly. But he stood up at the inquest to say that the problem was between the family and the liaison officer, and so he completely ignored what happened in the first investigation. Then in 1997, we met with Jack Straw, who was Shadow Home Secretary. I explained to him that around Stephen's murder and how the police had been treating us, the fact that they believe that we as a black family were criminals, and so we were not treated in the way in which I thought that we should. And then he said that if they were to win the general election, that he would for a public inquiry. They won the general election. And so our next meeting, I think he got a little bit cold feet, because rather than having a public inquiry where I thought we would hear about what happened around Stephen's murder, he decided he wanted to do something similar to what the Scarman report did, which that just sit on the shelf. It did not help, and there's no way I would find out exactly what happened around Stephen. So I managed to persuade him. So the inquiries, in terms of reference, was look into the murder of Stephen Lawrence and lesson to be learned. The inquiry started in 98. And then I had another problem, because the judge that they decided to bring for the inquiry, he was a judge that was involved in around immigration. And my understanding about the judge, that all the immigration cases that came to him, he upheld all of them, and so the right of appeal would never happen. And I thought, well, if somebody around immigration, how will he understand about the plight of us as black individuals and what happened around my son? So I made another fuss, and Jack Straw just said, well, we've got no other judge, so we have to have him. But I think it was a marker in the sand for him, because during the, in my opinion, during the inquiry, he listened and understood what we within the community were saying about our treatment as within the black community. The publication of the inquiry happened in 1999, and it was reported in the House of Commons, and it was said it was a watershed. And that was when it was said that the police was institutional racist. All the information that gathered and all the things that came forward, it was able to prove what we were saying as a family, how we were treated. There were 70 recommendations came out of the inquiry. And the one that I think was quite important, in fact, all of them was quite important, but it was around the Race Relation Amendment Act 2000. And for the first time, that the police was included in the act. Before, the police was not, so they could be as racist as they like, and they could never be taken to court. So the Race Relation 2000 Act was quite significant, and that was the 11th within the inquiry. Then, I'm moving on really quickly because I think my 10 minutes is almost up. 2003, we had Mark Daly, who was doing a filming called The Secret Policeman. He was an individual, he was a reporter, and decided that he was going to join as a new recruit. So while he was there, he was doing all the filming as to all the new recruits, officers coming in. Because before all of this, I used to say, because of all the racism that was happening within the police, perhaps it would be really good if we were to get rid of all the police and start all over again. But when Mark Daly did this filming, the officers, well, the new recruits was coming in, he was just filming. These officers were talking about what they would like to do to Black and Asian people. So my theory of getting rid of all the police and starting all over again was out of the window. Because if you're having new recruits coming in and their views around ethnic minority was the same as what is in the force now, where do we move on from there? And at the time, David Blunkett was Home Secretary. And when he heard about the film, he did everything he could to make sure that film was not aired. He wanted to take out an injunction to stop the film, but he never managed that. So we were able to see The Secret Policeman on our TV. 2004, back in 93, August, the case was dropped around the individual. 2004, they were doing another investigation into Stephen's murder. The CPS decided again to say there was no further action, that there was not enough evidence. And at that time, I was invited to the CPS office. I was given a letter to tell me that they decided to discontinue with the case. And the question they said to me, would you like me to be here while you read it? And I said, no. And when they came back, they said to me, would you like to talk to me about it? And I said, no. I was not given the opportunity beforehand so I could read and digest the letter, so I could speak to them about it. But to call me into their office and hand me a letter at that point to say that they decided to drop the case, I decided I didn't want to speak to them. 2006, Mark Daly did another filming, and this was called The Boys Who Killed Stephen Lawrence. And this film was looking at the police officers and how they investigated the case. And he went to Spain, where John Davidson, who was one of the officers involved in the investigation, and through him, the corruption with David Norris, one of the individuals who was involved in Stephen's murder, and apparently there was something of him seen accepting envelopes. So you could see right from the start that Stephen's case had no chance whatsoever. Fast forward to 2012, when we eventually had 2 individuals being sent down for Stephen's murder. And that was, I never expected to see that. And I begin to have slight confidence now, because the officer who was working with me at the time of that case, he would phone me, give me information I kept to myself, because I didn't see that I needed to go to the press about it, because what he was trying to do was to help to get a conviction in Stephen's murder. By the end of that time, they decided that this officer, he was coming up to retirement, but he wanted to continue. But the force decided that he should retire. So no more was I able to have the information and the relationship with one police officer, which I've never had in the whole of nearly 20 years. Then 2013, then the revelation of undercover policing, where back in 93, unbeknownst to us, they were an undercover policeman assigned to look at our campaign, to discredit us as a family, because the police felt that we were too challenging to them. 2014, Mark Ellison review. I went to see the Home Secretary, Theresa May, around the corruption that was happened during Stephen's case. And I was asking for an inquiry, but she decided for us to have a review, which was better than nothing. And Mark Ellison was the barrister who, during the prosecution of those individuals that we managed to went to prison. So he was doing the review around corruption, and his finding was published in 2014. And they had to do it in the House of Commons, because what was within the report, had he did it outside, he could be liable. So it was done in the House of Commons. Here we are, 200 years later, at the Cambridge Union to celebrate 200 years. And this year, the Home Secretary has announced we're having a public inquiry into the undercover policing. So we've come like full circle from what happened with Stephen in 1993 to where we haven't been able to have two public inquiry. So in conclusion, I say the police service should increase trust and confidence amongst the minority and ethnic community. My interaction with senior officers for them to have clear understanding of what should be expected of them. And finally, on the 21st of April 1993, I had no involvement with the police. And then the 22nd of April, all changed. And that's what brought me here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baroness Lawrence. To open the case for side opposition, I call Katie Bourne. Katie is the Director of the Board of the College of Policing and is also a Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex and a former District Councillor. Katie.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. Sir Robert Peel said the behaviour of a constable is derived from public consent and should maintain, and I quote, the approval, respect and affection of the public. Unsurprisingly then, that public confidence in the police will and should be scrutinised more closely than any other public institution. The police historically have been the proxy for the state and in turn for many of its failings. Sir Robert Mark, an ex-commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, said, again I quote, "The police are the anvil on which society beats out the problems and abrasions of social inequality, of racial prejudice, weak laws, and ineffective legislation." It is within this context that so often the frustrations, the misunderstandings, or frailties of our nation state and our people are transferred to policing. Of course, the police make mistakes, and they must be at the vanguard of securing the utmost public trust and confidence in the way that they use their powers. So often, the erroneous behaviour of one serving officer is labelled as that of the police and 120,000 others, and they're not looked at as the actions of one or two individuals. My own example of this was 2 months ago in Shoreham, the air disaster that happened in Sussex, where a jet plane fell out of the sky and killed 11 people. Fantastic work by all the emergency services, particularly by the police, and yet two officers, two young, inexperienced officers, tweeted from the event a hashtag that was quite grotesque and almost overshadowed all the good work that those other officers had done. We live in a time of unparalleled transparency, and social media enables this. So is it any wonder that any focus on police integrity gives the impression that all policing is getting worse? What is often happening in one country can easily be interpreted as a problem in your own. It is very confusing. Look at the House motion tonight. The House asks, do the police still live up to the mantra fidelity, bravery, and integrity? But that is the mantra of the FBI. We all know the mantra of UK policing is hello, hello, hello. What have we here then? No, I jest. In the Met, a force that often comes under fire, They receive over 2.8 million calls every year. Now, a 1% error rate would equate to 28,000 potential bad news stories. The police, by virtue of their job, are an easy target like no other. Is it really surprising that they frequently hit the headlines for all the wrong reasons? Legitimacy in all our public institutions is eroding. Look at MPs' expenses. Look at the NHS, particularly in Staffordshire. Look at the bankers. The constant scrutiny and media availability makes it all the more apparent. So, how does this stack up to the areas of concern highlighted in the motion tonight? Well, let's take the London riots of 2011 for starters. The spark for these events caused by the actions of the police in the shooting of Mark Duggan, but they escalated and they continued, and that was fueled by a much wider, complex societal problem. Independent report entitled The Riots, Communities and Victims Panel concluded that the riots were not just about suspicion with the police, but they were caused by the anger and the frustration of a lack of opportunities for young people. They were caused by poor parenting, by a failure in the justice system to rehabilitate offenders, and significantly, a material greed in many of those to steal property and designer goods. Public confidence in the police, amazingly, actually went up after the London riots to an all-time high. Let's look at corruption and bribery. Any corruption and bribery in policing goes to the heart of undermining public trust and policing by consent and must be rooted out wherever it lies. But how problematic is this? The police's success in rooting out unprofessional behaviour often provides the sticks with which they're regularly beaten in the public. Following 3 years of intensive investigation under Operation Elvedon into the payment by journalists for information, out of the 30 convictions, 5 were of police officers. As utterly unacceptable as this is and was, the bribery was not endemic within the police service. Dame Elizabeth Filkin recognised in her report into the police relationship with the media that much of the failings of the police in providing information to the media was through a misplaced naivety and a historic culture of the police allowing the media to cultivate a close and informal relationship without clear professional boundaries. And from my own personal experience, local media in Sussex are always complaining of the lack of police contact. Make of that what you will. Indeed, Lord Justice Leveson found in his 2011 public inquiry that there was no systematic corruption in the police, but a naivety of how to engage and manage the press. Let's turn to the erosion of civil liberties. The role of the police in upholding civil liberties is often conflated with the effectiveness of Parliament to set the laws governing them and the courts to determine the legal boundaries for their application. Police have a huge responsibility and a challenge to interpret the myriad of laws and operate within the often grey boundaries. For example, facilitating protest while safeguarding the rights of others, using proportionate force to protect the public, and using stop and search powers. I'll allow. Does that erode into my time? Just yours. Good. Excellent.
Thank you. From the 2013-14 figures released by the Met themselves, of the 560 stop and searches from under the Section 60 Public Order Act, only 5%, that's 1 in 20, were actually arrested, and that's 19 in 20 were let go. And of those, 67% were non-white, were basically not white, were ethnic minorities. Is that proportionate? And if you were black and white, if you were non-white, if you were black or Asian, would you trust the police on that basis?
I was referring to stop and search powers to prevent serious crimes on the streets and an erosion of civil liberties here, rather than the reasons why they actually stopped and searched in the first place. And we know that the police service are now implementing a much stricter regime across stop and search, and particularly in Sussex, where they're one of the pilot areas for this. So moving on, British police are arguably the most accountable in the world. Very few others have the level of scrutiny and oversight, the checks and balances that our police have. We have police and crime commissioners now. We have Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. We have the Independent Police Complaints Commission. I can say firsthand as a PCC that they are held to account. It's my job to do that. If the police don't operate within the law, we ensure that officers get prosecuted and, yes, chief constables get sacked. Taking of a life by a police officer is probably the ultimate test of the powers conferred on our police constables and must be subject to the most rigorous scrutiny in law and professional practice. Sadly, the police have got this wrong in the past, but they have also learnt and they have greatly improved. And we need to get risk into perspective. In 2014-15, there were just short of 15,000 police firearm operations in England and Wales. Firearms were discharged on only 2 occasions, and there was one fatality of a 40-year-old man holding a woman hostage with a knife in Islington, London. In 2015, 2 police shooting fatalities occurred, both 40-year-old white males, one in Enfield, London, and one here in Cambridge. In America, by contrast, police fatal shootings average 500 to 800 every year. A USA Today report showed that 2 black men were likely to be killed per week by US law enforcement, and black teenagers were 21 times more likely to be shot by American police than were white teens. In 2013, at least 460 people were killed by US police in what they term justifiable homicides, according to official FBI reports. But actually, if you read the media reports, it was probably more likely 1,000 were killed. Do you know how many in the same year in England and Wales were killed? None. 0. I'm told here I've got 1 minute. Perhaps it's no surprise that President Obama's own commission into policing has turned to our British model. Professor Larry Sherman, director of the Institute of Criminology at this very university, has recently given evidence stating, to increase confidence in policing, the US needs to replicate the British policing model in oversight, transparency, and accountability. In fact, in his own words, Larry Sherman says, and I quote, "Few, if any nations have achieved more public safety with less police use of force than British policing." The police are not without fault, far from it. All of us here tonight are undoubtedly honest, courageous, diligent, and good. But even we at times are susceptible to stray and on occasions be bad, and our police force is meant to represent us. If you'll just indulge me, I will read to you, as a police and crime commissioner in Sussex, I get a lot of correspondence from the public. And here is just one letter I received on the 22nd of September this year. Dear Commissioner Bourne, blah, blah, blah. We appreciate the pressures and at times unreasonable demands that police forces nationally are under. But despite this, continue to provide an outstanding service. Unfortunately, the only means that we have at our disposal to demonstrate our appreciation is to write a letter like this. Let me read you one more. And this is very pertinent. Bishop Peter Ball was recently sentenced for child abuse. This is a letter dated the 16th of November from one of the witnesses at that case. I was a witness in the recent case against Peter Ball. I wish to record my sincere thanks to you and to your team on the operation for your unfailing fairness, integrity, sensitivity, capability, and professionalism with which you have all dealt with my evidence given over 3 long years. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, I urge you and the House not to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Usually at this point I'd try and blame somebody else for getting the motto of the police in the country I'm currently in wrong. But that was all me, actually, because I wrote that description. So sorry for mixing up the FBI and the UK police. I blame Google. To continue the case for the proposition bench, I call Franstine Jones. Franstine is the first woman president of the National Black Police Association who has campaigned for more BME representation in the police force. Franstine.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, President, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this important debate. My approach to this debate is very simple. Confidence in Her Majesty's Police Service is underpinned by actions, evidence, and experiences. First, I will contextualise my thoughts by reminding you of a series of events which illustrate a litany of police organisational failures, malpractices, and scandals. The cumulative effect of these events is the undermining of the confidence in Her Majesty's Police Service. So let's begin. Improper relations between the police and the media revealed by the Leveson inquiry. Investigative failure of child sexual abuse, for example, Jimmy Savile, North Wales, Oxford, and Rotherham. Discrediting of victims, cover-ups, and related wrongdoings revealed by the Hillsborough inquiry. Allegations that the police bugged the family of Stephen Lawrence and Dwayne Brooks and other high-profile race campaign groups. Serious allegations made against the police undercover teams, including developing personal relationships and fathering children under their false identities and using the names of dead children as pseudonyms. Let me now focus your attention to the issue of race, which I, as the Vice President of the National Black Police Association, believe are at the heart of confidence in Her Majesty's Police Service for members of my organisation and the diverse communities which we serve. Whilst we are currently celebrating the 50th anniversary of the 1968 Race Relations Act, this important moment in history, British history, belies an uncomfortable truth about Her Majesty's Police Service. In 1968, James Callaghan, the then Home Secretary, was pressurised by the Police Federation, Police Service and police authorities into abandoning plans to make the police come under the auspices of the 1968 Race Relations Act. The result of which was that racial discrimination was not made an offence within the Police Disciplinary Code. Racial discrimination only became an offence within the Police Disciplinary Code through the introduction of the Race Relations Amendment Act 2000 in the aftermath of the Macpherson inquiry into the death of Stephen Lawrence. Ladies and gentlemen, this historical fact demonstrates the level of entrenched resistance to accountability of Her Majesty's Police Service in the area of race. Accountability is a key feature of confidence. The modern-day reality of Her Majesty's Police Service is an organisation which is slow, resistant and hostile to change, especially in employment and service delivery when it comes to race. Employment and service delivery are two key factors of confidence. From Scarman to Macpherson, long-standing concerns have been raised about the importance of the police service reflecting the community that it serves. In 1981, there were only 326 black officers in the police in England and Wales. Of this figure, 132 were from the Metropolitan Police. Currently, 5.5% of police officers are from a BME background in Her Majesty's Police Service in England and Wales. Whilst only 5 BME officers are of Chief Superintendent rank or higher, The majority of BME police officers are concentrated in the lower ranks of police constable. This slow pace of change was recognised by the 2013 Home Affairs Committee inquiry into leadership and standards in the police. The committee stated the following: diversity has for far too long been given lip service, but not action in the police service. It is very disappointing that 10 years after the Macpherson report and 20 years after the death of Stephen Lawrence, so little progress has been made. Indeed, suspected of being a whistleblower behind the story of institutional racism in Cleveland Police. The then chair of the Police Federation for Cleveland, a solicitor for the Federation, and 3 journalists for the Northern Echo newspaper. If we take the case of former Metropolitan Police Detective Sergeant Gerpel Verdi, a man more sinned against than sinning. A man who complained of race discrimination, gave evidence to the Macpherson inquiry into the death of Stephen Lawrence, and then who in 1998 was arrested, had his home searched, and he was accused of sending race hate mail to himself and other ethnic minority officers. Whilst a police disciplinary panel dismissed Gerpel in March 2000, an employment tribunal found that the Metropolitan Police had racially discriminated against him in August 2000. Sadly for Gerpel, the story continued. His nightmare only ended on the 31st of July this year. Ladies and gentlemen, I was there. I was there when they cleared him of indecently assaulting a male prisoner and misconduct in a public office. There were many disturbing elements of this case. However, the most disturbing aspect of this case, which is the Metropolitan Police put out a damaging, inaccurate press release. Ladies and gentlemen, that press release accused Gerpel Verdi of indecent assault of a boy under the age of 16, when he was not. Furthermore, the Metropolitan Police knew for over a year that the individual was not under 16. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't need to explain to you the serious ramifications of this. Police powers such as stop and search, strip searches, and other police powers are contentious issues, especially across BME communities. Over the years, official figures and research have indicated that stop and search powers have been overused, misused, and abused with dramatic excess in the volume of stop and search over the last decade, the impact of which has served to damage confidence in Her Majesty's Police Service. Latest figures reveal that black people are 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched compared to white people. It is telling that in its 2010 report into stop and search, the Equality and Human Rights Commission stated, "The evidence points to racial discrimination being a significant reason why black and Asian people are more likely to be stopped and searched than white people. It implies that stop and search powers are being used in a discriminatory and unlawful way." When it comes to race, history shows us that excessive use of force by Her Majesty's Police Service can have devastating and widespread consequences. Excessive use of court on Cherry Gross and Cynthia Jarrett, which triggered the Brixton and Toxteth riots in 1985. The shooting of Mark Duggan, which triggered rioting in Tottenham and beyond in 2011. The consequences and actions, evidence and experiences I highlighted are human, financial and reputational damage. The costs, losses, damages result in undermining confidence in Her Majesty's Police Service. In closing, let me leave you with the stern warning made by Lord Scarman in 1981. The police officer must act within the law. Abuse of power by a police officer, if it be allowed to occur with impunity, is a staging post to the police state. Thank you.
Thank you, Franstine. To continue the case for side opposition, we have David Michael. David is a former detective inspector who has 30 years of experience in the police. He's an ethnic minority officer at the Labour Party Executive Committee and branch chair. David.
President, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to use my 30 years as a police officer in the Metropolitan Police collecting evidence to preface my remarks. I'm not here to collude with unlawful policing. I'm not here to defend the indefensible. I take no issue whatsoever with the remarks of Baroness Lawrence. I fully accept that there have been some outrageous episodes in policing. The secret policeman was mentioned earlier on, and the response when recruit officers were discovered during training to be displaying and articulating abhorrent racist perspectives. The response by officialdom was that the Home Secretary was very angry that Mark Daly had joined the police service by subterfuge and had uncovered this. The response by the Chief Constable was anger that Mark Daly had joined the police service. Rather than thanking Mark Daly for doing something that the police service should have been doing, really was serious about dealing with what I described long before the Stephen Lawrence inquiry recommendation of endemic racism. So I'm not here to suggest that there haven't been some major failures in leadership, some major operational failures. But what I am saying in opposing the proposition is that this doesn't define our police service. As horrendous and as awful as some of those cases are, and those cases include transgressing the law, they include ineffective and ineffectual policing. But my position is that they do not define our police service. And when I joined the police service myself, it was wholly and unaccountable a police service. That was 4 years before the Race Relations Act of 1976. Police were accountable to no one. They didn't care what the press and media thought. They didn't care what politicians thought. They didn't care what the local communities thought. But since the Bow Street Runners, which were the forerunners of the Metropolitan Police in 1829, the police have been on a constant road to reform. And if we talk about lack of confidence, as I was joining before I was a police constable, as I was joining the Metropolitan Police as a police cadet in 1971, there was a case about a gentleman called David Olawale in Leeds, who was tormented and assaulted and eventually killed by 2 police officers. And this was a case where there was a rare occasion where 2 police officers were convicted, but not of manslaughter as they were originally charged, but of assault. And was nevertheless, because the trial judge was very hostile to the deceased person and was biased and unfair. But even at that time, and long before the Race Relations Act of 1976 and long before the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, it was a junior police officer who had come forward to senior officers to say, look, I've heard people boasting about abusing and assaulting David Olawale, and this led to an independent investigation by the Metropolitan Police that led to charges and a trial and conviction of an inspector and a sergeant. So as much as there are aberrations, you will always find police officers within the police service, within the Metropolitan Police Service, within the British Police Service, who will come forward, and it is police officers within Professional Standards Department who will investigate these matters and bring criminal police officers to justice. I myself served within what was then called Complaints Investigation Bureau under Metropolitan Police, and I was pleasantly surprised at the time in 1986 when I thought the only people who we would get calls from would be members of the public. I was pleasantly surprised at the level of serving police officers who would call the Complaints Investigation Bureau to say that certain colleagues were transgressing the law or the police regulations. So, trust and confidence, and this was one of the key recommendations from the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry and Stephen Lawrence Inquiry recommendations. And in my view, one of the ways of measuring trust and confidence in our police service is with regard to what some people would refer to as day-to-day policing. It's reporting of assaults, breaches of the peace, antisocial behaviour, missing persons. And spare a thought, the argument that there's a loss of confidence in our police service, spare a thought for the parent or the family where either a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old goes missing, completely out of context. Spare the thought for the parent with their heart sinking about this child, whether it's a 5-year-old or a 50 or a teenager. And do those parents not look round to our police service to intervene, to embark on an investigation? So I say that is a critical example of where we as a community do have the trust and confidence in our police service. And we can go through the whole menu of events, be it a road traffic accident in an urban area, motorway. How many times do we hear on the news there's been a 15-car pile-up on one or other of our motorways? Do we not expect our police service to deal with that? And since my almost 13 years of retirement from the police service, I've been involved in community police engagement groups where constantly we have local residents and members of the community bemoaning the loss of officers on safer neighborhood teams and the loss of officers who've been engaging with the community being moved on to some other duties. And more recently, this has been focused on police community support officers who are very much in this time of scarce resources, been very much an aspect of visible policing to our local communities. And then we come on to, as serious as these matters are, some people may define them as routine policing matters. But I think one way of judging whether our community are losing confidence in our police is when you ring up, for any given reason, when you ring up the non-emergency number. And those numbers are not diminishing. And especially London is the area I know best. And if you go to Lewisham Police Station, which is my borough, or Brixton Police Station, or Tottenham Police Station, you don't see a diminution in people coming to the front counter looking for support and assistance from our police officers. And then you come to the more serious side of policing, which is child abduction, kidnappings, and kidnaps are not reported widely in the media. Then we get the aspects of professional standards intervening, where at one time the police service were more reluctant to be open about allegations about police officers. But now these allegations are publicised widely before the misconduct hearing. And I think that does engender trust and confidence. And then we have the Police Bravery Awards, where over 40 police officers are put forward for bravery awards on a regular basis for actions which are above and beyond anyone would expect. I've been very much involved in all the organisations for police officers killed in the line of duty. Police officers making the ultimate sacrifice. And I think our communities are very much appreciative and would not lose confidence in police officers who make the ultimate sacrifice. I'm going to end with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. It says, "Every people," that includes our police service, "every people has its share of profiteers, freeloaders, and escapists. The real issue is whether, in the great mass, the dominant characteristics are decency, honour, and courage." And I would argue it's not just the High Command at New Scotland Yard or the Chief Constables around the country, but it's people like Noah Roberts, Michael Fuller, Robin Williams, Ronald Hope, Jeffrey Brathwaite. These people from an African or African Caribbean heritage and their legacy have made an enduring contribution to our police service that cannot erode the trust and confidence of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We now have time for a round of floor speeches. So who'd like to make a speech in proposition of the motion? This House has lost confidence in Her Majesty's police force. In proposition. Really, anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
So the first speaker on the opposition told us that it's so often the action of one erroneous officer that leads to us losing confidence in the police. Can it be one erroneous officer, or even 10 erroneous officers, or even 100, that disproportionately use stop and search against BME individuals and teenagers in general, who turn up hours late to robberies, and who systematically fail the victims of violent sexual crime? Or is it more likely, on the balance of probabilities, that this is the failings of the entire police system and not just erroneous officers within it? Because one officer, 10 officers, 100 officers, or even 1,000 officers simply couldn't just be that rubbish. It kind of has to be an entire and systematic failing, doesn't it?
Do you want to respond? Yeah, if you'd like to.
Do you stand or you sit?
Yeah, whatever you like.
In response to that, I would say that if you tar everybody with the same brush, you're going to live life very disappointed. If I had £1 for every student I'd seen vomiting in the streets of Brighton on a great night out, I wouldn't have a great deal of respect for anybody sitting in this room tonight. So God forbid I tar you all with that brush as well. Thank you.
All of you just flashed back to when you last did that as well. So. Speech in opposition. Opposition to the motion. This House has lost confidence in Her Majesty's police force. Who disagrees? There must be one of you. Opposition? Last chance? No? Good. Good sign. Oh, sorry, where? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd just like to say something. When we look to the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, for example, we see it as a rising phenomenon in the rest of Europe. And I look to the UK, and I am instilled with confidence at the fact that police officers in the UK are in conversation with local Jewish communities, are posted outside local synagogues, outside local Jewish schools, etc. And there's a real sense of commitment to protect our Jewish community. I don't speak of experience with any other community, and I can only share my experience with that of the Jewish community, but that is something which does instill me with confidence for Her Majesty's Police Service, which is the debate open tonight. So that's why I speak in opposition of the motion. Thank you.
And a speech in abstention. I was about to read out your tweet, but yeah, sure, go ahead.
Sarah Sheard, Hamilton College. I think we should talk about what confidence means in this debate. Confidence is a fantastic word for the union to use because it's kind of slippery. I think your confidence in the police force is going to be, judged a lot on your experiences with them. I've been extremely lucky that my only brush with the police has been my bike got stolen last year and they were incredibly unhelpful in finding it. I'm incredibly lucky that it was just a stolen bike that I could replace quite easily. But I think we have to think about the differences we're going to have in experiences with the police if we're black or an ethnic minority, or even if you're a woman, or even if you live in a certain area of the UK. I mean, if you report a rape in Cheshire, you're 33% likely to have your case referred on to conviction. Well, not even conviction, like going through the courts. If you live in Cambridgeshire, you're 88% more likely to have your case proceed to a court trial and actually have a chance of getting justice. I mean, to have a postcode lottery on a conviction of a crime, and not even a conviction, I mean, conviction of rape is 5.7%. And that's not entirely the police's fault, but I think confidence is a word that we've got to judge based on individual experience. And it's difficult when we're thinking as a house, we're thinking as a collective, but I think it's something we should keep in mind.
That's really annoyed me because I've got several tweets here, mainly about David's bow tie, and there was one, a serious political point, and that was going to be my tweet for the night, and Sarah's just said it, so great. Another speech in proposition. Yeah, down here. Just keep talking.
Okay.
Something will happen. There you go.
I think a point needs to be made that hasn't been addressed yet here, and that is that having confidence in a police force would mean that I'm confident that I am safe in a country where the police force is operating. And the problem is that the police force has completely abandoned foot patrols and basically preventing crime, and has moved to only reacting to crime that has already happened. Now, since even if they succeed in finding, prosecuting, and then convicting whoever has committed the crime, that is not nearly half as good as if the crime never happened in the first place. And we always hear that the police force is stretched and that there are not enough resources, but fact is that per capita population and in total, Her Majesty's police force has more officers than it did in the 60s, And it is also a fact that the crime rates are rising. And then, of course, the police is fiddling with the numbers, as in 2013, the House of Commons has investigated themselves. Therefore, I believe that this House should lose confidence into Her Majesty's police force, and that is because it is simply not keeping them safe, but, if anything, is trying to catch those who have already committed crimes and you have therefore suffered already.
David.
One of the issues, I think, is that Her Majesty's Police Service gets wrongly accused, where the responsibility, I won't say the blame, the responsibility often lies with other people. So, for example, since 1985, we've had the Prosecution of Offences Act, where the Crown Prosecution Service makes decisions about which case to prosecute or not, but often in the press and media, and then you get sometimes outcries in the House of Commons about whether a case should have been brought or not, and that's aimed at the police service, where the responsibility actually is with the Crown Prosecution Service. And actually, in this time of austerity, the budgets for operational policing even has been cut back and is being cut back, and frontline policing is being cut back, and certainly in London, where the police community and police community support officers are the visibility resource of policing, and they're under complete threat to be withdrawn. So those are actually hardcore financial cuts from central government that should not be aimed at operational chief officers or even local operational commanders. And in terms of a number of other things where it's actually civil servants and ministers and the Home Office who actually are responsible for things, which then fall back on our police service, which again is quite unfair and unjustified.
And a speech in opposition. Opposition? Yeah, the back there.
Hello, Henry Mitson, Gonville and Keyes College. I'm a pretty simple fellow. In fact, in my essays, I'm always told that I'm making too simplistic a point. But it seems to me whether this House has confidence in Her Majesty's Police Service doesn't come down to whether it's a perfect service, but it seems to me it's a question of whether we feel safe when we leave the House, whether we feel safe on the streets of Cambridge. When I leave my accommodation and go to college or go to my supervisions, I don't think, oh, am I going to get attacked when I'm out on the streets? Is that because I'm naive? Perhaps. Perhaps it is because I'm naive. Is it because, in fact, everyone else in the world is a perfectly nice person and we're all lovely and no one commits any crime? Or is it because the police is performing its service as a deterrent? Is it stopping people from acting in evil ways because it's deterring them from that, because of their good work? So I just like to ask those questions, and that's the conclusion of my speech.
For those concerned by the mass exodus of people, nothing has gone wrong. It's simply because they're all the competitive debaters who have an IV now. So don't worry. I was worried. Someone just told me it's not a worry. It looks like you weren't worried, but I was, so I said it anyway. Right. Point in abstention, please. Yeah, just there.
I think it's very difficult to determine whether or not we have or have not lost confidence in Her Majesty's police force, because it doesn't really seem like anyone really cares. In terms of the turnout for the police and crime commissioners in England, it was 15%. So I think it's very difficult to talk about whether or not we feel safe and whether or not we even attribute our safety to the police force when our political engagement with the police is so lacking.
Just got two very sad police and crime commissioners now looking at me. If Adam's happy responding, then you can respond, yes.
What a great debate. Just to give you confidence, I had the highest turnout in the country. So I'm not too sure that says more about me or about the fact that there was also a by-election and parliamentary by-election going on at the same time. I don't know. Public engagement is really difficult. So I represent a population of 700,000 people, 300,000 households. How on earth do you communicate to that many people consistently? And that's the challenge for me. I'm not standing again in May, so that'll be someone else's problem. But it is obviously, for Katie, Mr. President, a very large problem because her force area is harder. But it is an issue that we have failed to grapple, so I agree with that. But that's probably lack of confidence in police and crime commissioners rather than police.
You're welcome to keep... No? Okay, cool. Cool. So, to return to the main debate, we now have Adam Simmons. Adam is the first Police and Crime Commissioner for Northamptonshire and apparently had the highest turnout ever, so well done, Adam. He represented the Conservative Party in the 2012 election. Adam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a great debate, so thank you very much, Mr. President, for allowing me to be part of that. I feel very humbled to be in this room. I was 16 when I was sat on a sofa in my home in Neasden and the news came on and we heard as a family about the tragedy of Stephen Lawrence. And I have grown up as a result of that. I'm not too sure how many people in here have done that the way I have, certainly been 16 at the time. In the wake of that, and for me that's quite a thing to become a police and crime commissioner, knowing in London certainly that's a context which it's still dealing with, and we know the Lawrence family is still dealing with that now. I was 8 years old when my mother and I was next to her when she was attacked in London, a serious knife attack as well. But the police who turned up to our house that evening were exemplary. So I don't begin my contribution by saying for 1 minute that individual police officers aren't good or put their life on the line. We've seen in Paris and we've seen around the world people lay their lives on the line to protect us, and they do that every single day. There are people who are invisible to us, who work for our security agencies, and Katie and I, Mr. President, are honoured to learn sometimes privately about the exploits of those people, and we should admire them. So this isn't a debate about courage, it isn't a debate about whether people are brave or not. This is a debate about confidence. And I'm a police and crime commissioner, so by definition I should be holding my force to account. But I'm also one of 42, and we're a college, if you like, of police and crime commissioners that are supposed to challenge the system to make it work better. And we're having a hard time. I've mentioned at dinner, trying to reform the police is a bit like trying to raise the Titanic with tweezers. It is virtually, if not impossible at times. It feels like that. Police and crime commissioners are the reform. We are supposed to bring accountability, we're supposed to bring transparency, and I believe we are doing that. However, ask a chief constable what the future of policing looks like, and they don't know what to say to you. What does it look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? What is your service going to look like? Where will it be? What will police stations look like? They can't tell you. They're obsessed right now with cuts. We were all obsessed by cuts and ever-diminishing resources. We're told that our public service is falling apart as a result. But in spite of that, even knowing that their offer to you and me is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, they're still unable to tell you what their service will look like. I find that I lose confidence in that. Stop search has been mentioned this evening. It's a very important police power. I'm not somebody who's advocating its removal, but I am someone who's advocating it to be used properly and lawfully. And if we're told by the Home Secretary that 30% in this country is unlawful, then we have a problem. We've reformed Stop Search in Northamptonshire. I won't bore you or this house this evening with what we've done. But you know what I got the most media coverage about? That I asked police officers when they were getting that power wrong to say sorry. And the fact the Mail on Sunday and the radio found that more interesting, Police and Crime Commissioner asking the police to say sorry, was headline news, as opposed to the 14 people who've been suspended for misusing the power. So we do have some problems in the police service, and I would say that, for me, confidence, and I think Sarah, Mr. President, asked a very important question: what does confidence mean? It doesn't just mean trust, in a sense. It doesn't just actually mean that you're not going to go out and get mugged. It does actually mean that you feel there is the forces across this country have a purpose. They are moving beyond just their traditional institutions, moving beyond what they have learned and they're taught. Ask yourself how many chief constables in this country are black, or how many are non-white. As far as I'm aware, none. How many are women? A handful. We're making progress. But I haven't got confidence that the police forces in this country actually know how to get to the 21st century, let alone the 20th century. So the challenge then for police and crime commissioners, Mr. President, like Katie and I, is to challenge and to push and to move them forward. And that is incredibly difficult. I think after a generation or two of police and crime commissioners, we might be there. But it's incredibly frustrating. I'm reforming the police service in North Hampshire by merging the fire service with the police service. You would have thought the world had come to an end by that suggestion. I got a few photographs sent to me on email with a police car with a ladder on the roof and 2 buckets of water in the boot with the question, is this what you mean? Absolutely not. But I'm talking about bringing services together that actually shouldn't be separate. Why do you ring 999 today and someone answers the phone and says to you, which service do you require, as opposed to, can I help? You have to make that decision. You just crashed the car. Maybe you've harmed someone. Maybe you're hurt yourself. And you're expected to decide, do I need an ambulance? Do I need a fire brigade? Do I need a police officer? We haven't progressed. North Hampshire has about 1,200 calls a day to its control room. And yet, in July, over 4,000 calls were abandoned by people calling our 101 number. 80% of calls coming into a control room are roughly nothing to do with the police. And about 20% are policing matters. I listened in on a call, someone phoning up to say, my neighbour has just defecated outside his house and then gone back into the house. Can I have the police, please? It gives a very different kind of sense to a shit job. It really does. I'm not sure, Mr. President, whether I can do that here, but I have just done it. I do apologise. They are doing things which they shouldn't have to do. I don't have confidence that the police actually know how to move forward and how to break out of what they have always been doing. So my only challenge, really, gently to my colleagues, is if they can stand up here and tell me what the future of policing looks like without telling me it looks smaller and with less money, then perhaps you might get my confidence back. Thank you.
To conclude the case for side opposition, we have Stephen Parkinson. If you have a gripe with the government, now is your moment to question a representative or a former representative from it. Stephen is a former president of this union and is a former special advisor to the current Home Secretary. It's just been announced that he's taken up a senior role in the Vote Leave campaign for the EU referendum. Stephen. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for immediately losing me the votes of everybody in the room who is a Eurosceptic and a subject that has nothing to do with tonight's debate. At the beginning of this week, 2 police officers were called out to an incident of antisocial behaviour in East London. Some kids were driving around on a moped in a car park late at night. Just before midnight, one of the 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police who attended that call was stabbed in the stomach by one of those kids and is currently in hospital in a serious but stable condition. And one of those 2 teenagers, a 16-year-old boy, has been arrested and charged with his attempted murder. It's very easy in debates like tonight to mouth platitudes about the risks that our police officers put themselves under every time they go to work. But this is the reality, day in, day out, for every single police officer who wears that uniform and goes out to keep us safe. And I hope that's a thought that we'll all bear in mind as we go through our voting doors at the end of this debate. Mr. President, you've set us a tough task tonight. In fact, you set the bar even higher by asking us to have confidence not only in Her Majesty's constabulary, but also the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As Commissioner Bourne covered in her speech, thank goodness we are not in the United States of America. If you compare the records of policing in this country and the record in the United States, then you'll see what a difference the British model of policing by consent makes. And Blair, please.
Hi. So I spent 2 months over the summer working in Texas in their criminal justice system, and I just like to say that, like, patting ourselves on the back because we're not like the Americans who go around shooting unarmed civilians every other day, I don't think that's a huge achievement, frankly. And the fact that I know names like Stephen Lawrence, like Christopher Alder, like Zaid Mubarak, the fact that I know those names, frankly, doesn't instill much confidence in me.
You're right, it's a fair point. Much as the FBI is too high a bar for us to clear tonight, being better than Texas is too low a bar for those of us on this side of the House to convince you that we ought to have confidence in the British police, and I hope I'll be able to convince you that by the end of my speech. It falls to me as the final speaker to sort of sum up some of the points we've heard. The proposition case was opened by Baroness Lawrence. I was 10 years old when Stephen Lawrence was murdered. I'm aware that a lot of people in this room weren't even born in 1993. It was shocking enough for me in my early 30s to find myself working at the Home Office and find that new facts were emerging in the Stephen Lawrence case. As the Home Secretary said in the House of Commons when she talked about the Mark Ellison review, what he discovered was profoundly shocking, more than 20 years after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. As Lady Lawrence said, it can't be conveyed in 10 minutes what she's gone through over the last more than 2 decades. None of us can imagine what that must have been like, but thanks to her and the work of those around her, hopefully none of us will have to. Because a key point is that there have been vast improvements in policing since the early 1990s, thanks to the campaigns that people like Baroness Lawrence have waged. And there have been very significant changes to policing since 2010, thanks to the work of this Home Secretary. The opposition case opened. Katie Bourne spoke about Sir Robert Peel, who was a very fine Home Secretary with only one flaw. He was the Member of Parliament for Oxford University. Thanks to the British model of policing that he set up, the police are subject to greater scrutiny than any other public service, and that's very important. As Katie said, of course, the police make mistakes. That scrutiny has revealed them. We're not here to defend individual officers. We're here to defend the British model of policing and the 120,000 officers overall, and that is a key point. Franstine Jones talked about the cumulative effect of those high-profile failings. They are important. She mentioned a few, the Jimmy Savile case, what the child abuse in Rotherham, the Hillsborough affair. But these weren't just exposing failings in the police. They showed the failings of the BBC, of the National Health Service, of local councils like Rotherham. It's not just the police, it's the public services that are rightly being exposed to scrutiny. We're starting to reveal some of the awful things that happened in the past, but that is not exclusively the problem of the police. Please. It is a good question. It is a very Cambridge Union question to pose. I think we live in an age where there is rightly more skepticism about our public services. We're not automatically deferential to those in power, to those who wear a uniform, those who carry a baton, and that's right. We should be more questioning, but the price of that greater scrutiny is avoiding the cynicism and the disillusionment that can come with it. If you are skeptical of our public services, including our police, you can improve them, but that's not a reason to give up on them entirely and to lose your confidence on them. As the second speaker in the opposition, as David said, we're not here to defend the indefensible. We're here to defend the model overall. We had a good floor debate. The first speaker asked how many are too many, how many erroneous officers should there be? And Commissioner Bourne, I I think, very neatly cover that point by making the uncontroversial point that Cambridge students are superior to students at the University of Sussex. And as you know, nobody at Cambridge ever vomits in the street. That's what we have bins for, and then the gyp ladies. There were very nearly no points of information on the opposition side of the debate, which is always an inspiring thing for those speaking on these benches. But the second gentleman stood up valiantly and talked about the importance of policing in communities. He talked of the Jewish community, but community policing is extremely important. And it's thanks to reforms such as police and crime commissioners that we have made the police closer to the communities they represent. We've made it easier for people to say what sort of policing is important to them in their area and instill greater confidence in the police that they have. The lady from Homerton spoke of that unusual crime in this city of bike theft. I hate to be cynical myself, but I suggest that a stolen bike in Cambridge is, I'm afraid, an occupational hazard. She talked, though, about the much more serious point about the postcode lottery in convictions and prosecutions for serious crimes like rape. And again, through the election of police and crime commissioners, your accountable, accessible figurehead for each police force, we don't need to have that postcode lottery. You have somebody at the head of each force who can ask the questions on your behalf about why their force is not performing better than the neighbouring one. Yes?
So to be critical of myself for a moment, the force that only arrests 39% of people, perhaps resulting in domestic violence, what do you say to, should you have confidence in me?
Well, if you were facing the ballot box in May, I'm sure the voters of Northamptonshire would be able to express that. But I pay tribute to the work that you and other police and crime commissioners have done to know those statistics, to compare them to neighbouring forces, to examine, to look behind those figures and find out what is it that Northamptonshire Police is not doing that it ought to be and that other forces are already doing. And these reforms really are the reason I hope that some of you will consider to vote for us on the opposition side tonight. Since 2010, we've brought in police and crime commissioners, and you've seen two of them here tonight talking about the sort of innovative, accessible, and crucially accountable approach that they bring. But we've also brought in crime maps so that you can, from here in the comfort of the Cambridge Union Chamber, go on your smartphone and judge your local police force by the one metric that most matters, the level of crime in your area. We've opened up policing through direct entry. Why should it be the case that to become a senior police officer, you've had to start off 25 years before as a beat officer? Why not bring in people with different backgrounds from the army, from industry, from academia to shake things up a bit? We've done that. We've started at the other end with Police Now, a scheme similar to Teach First, so that those of you when graduating can go into the police, even if it's just for 2 years, to break that barrier between the policing and the policed. We've tried to increase the professionalisation of policing. We've set up the College of Policing for the first time, a professional body for this important public services, so that what the police do is based not on habit, but on evidence. The College of Policing have drawn up the first ever code of ethics for the police in this country, a sort of equivalent to what doctors have for the Hippocratic Oath. And they've established a national register of struck-off officers so that those few bad eggs that are exposed can be exposed for good. We've brought in the first ever non-policeman to be Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary. That was a very radical thing to do when Theresa May did it. And under Sir Thomas Windsor, HMIC have been able to shine a light on the new things. The misuse, in fact, the illegal use of stop and search in police forces up and down the country. They've looked at domestic violence and the varied way in which police forces cope with it. And they've looked at mental health. The institutions of policing themselves have accepted and recognised the need for change. ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers, voted overwhelmingly to abolish itself. The Police Federation, the sort of trade union for the police, voted overwhelmingly to change. And the reforms will continue in this Parliament through the Police and Criminal Justice Bill that's in Parliament at the moment, which will hopefully bring in a time limit on police bail so people don't have to languish for too long knowing whether they're really going to be brought to court. We're going to extend disciplinary procedures not just to serving officers, but to former officers too, so that they can't escape simply by retiring or moving forth. And we're making the Police Federation subject to the Freedom of Information Act so that people can have greater scrutiny directly. Adam spoke finally and courageously tried to tell us that this was not a debate about courage. This is a debate about confidence. He's right. He posed us a question. He said, ask a chief constable what the future of policing looks like, and they can't tell you. Well, thanks to the reforms that we've had since 2010, you don't need to ask just a police constable. You can ask your police and crime commissioner. You can go on the police.uk website. You can ask directly. There is greater scrutiny. But with that greater scrutiny, we need to be careful of the cynicism that can accompany it. And that's not a reason to abandon confidence in the police entirely. And for that reason, I beg to oppose.
Stephen, thank you. That concludes tonight's debate. But before the compulsion within your minds right now to reach for your bags and your coats takes hold of you, and I will call out anybody who stands up now. A couple of things happening this week which are important. Hoda Al-Hassisi will speak on Tuesday at 7 p.m. None of you know who she is, and that's fine. However, I know who she is because I study her, because she is the most senior woman in Saudi Arabian politics and is an incredibly interesting speaker, and I do recommend you come and hear what she has to say about the state of politics in the Middle East, especially for women, because it will be a very interesting talk. This house will split up the LGBT plus movement, will be next Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Some of you may have noticed that we had a bicentenary this year. We've mentioned it several times. Yes, no, we did. The bicentenary ball was a huge success, and even the TAB, who traditionally hate us, were complimentary of it. There will be a spring ball for the first time in quite a while next year, and tickets will go on sale for that on Wednesday at 6 p.m. I do encourage you all to get tickets. Finally, look out for emails this weekend if you want to work at the Cambridge Union. If you'd like to run for election, emails are going up about that soon. If you'd like to be appointed to the Cambridge Union, which is like the sort of first rung of getting involved here, that will all go out this weekend. Voting on this motion, as ever, is with your feet. If you'd like to vote in favour of the motion, please exit via the right door. If you're voting against this motion, please exit via the left door. And if you're abstaining, exit by the middle. The results will be announced via Twitter and in the bar. Good night.